Jim Cornette names 10 wrestlers he can't stand. Jim Cornette has no filter, and when it comes to these 10 wrestlers, he completely loses his mind. Some might call him old school, others say he's stuck in the past. But one thing is clear, when Cornette hates someone, everyone knows it. These aren't just casual dislikes. These are deep, burning feuds that have lasted years. Some are about wrestling style, others are about backstage incidents. A few are about the very soul of the business itself. So why do these names drive him so mad? Let's go one by one. 10. Effy. Let's start with a name that represents everything Cornette thinks is wrong with modern independent wrestling. Effy is a wrestler who brings theater and counterculture presentation to the ring. For Cornette, this is a complete betrayal of what wrestling should be. Wrestling is supposed to look like a real fight. It's supposed to make you believe two people actually hate each other. When you add excessive theatricality, you destroy that illusion. Cornette sees Effy as someone who mocks the very idea of wrestling as legitimate combat. Instead of presenting himself as a tough fighter, Effy leans into performance art. He treats the ring like a stage for cultural expression rather than athletic competition. This violates Cornette's core belief that wrestlers should look and act like they could hurt you in a real fight. The problem isn't just Effy himself, it's what he represents. Cornette believes that when wrestlers prioritize entertainment over believability, they're telling the audience the whole thing is fake. They're breaking the sacred rule of kayfabe, the idea that wrestling should maintain its illusion even when everyone knows it's scripted. When you present wrestling as pure theater, you lose the edge that makes it special. Effy's style appeals to a modern audience that doesn't care about old school rules. They want something different, something expressive, something that breaks boundaries. But to Cornette, breaking those boundaries means destroying the foundation. You can't have professional wrestling without the pretense of real conflict. Without that, you just have people doing moves with no emotional weight. This criticism extends beyond just one performer. Cornette uses Effy as shorthand for an entire movement in independent wrestling, a movement that values self-expression over selling, that prioritizes being different over being believable, that cares more about social media reactions than protecting the business. For Cornette, this is the death of everything he spent his career building. 9. Shinsuke Nakamura. Nakamura presents an interesting case because Cornette actually recognizes his talent. He admits Nakamura has ability and charisma, but that doesn't mean he likes what Nakamura represents or how his career has been handled. The criticism here is twofold. It's about style and about mismanagement. First, let's talk about strong style. Nakamura became famous for his hard-hitting Japanese wrestling approach. Cornette has problems with this style because he sees it as prioritizing stiff strikes over psychology. In traditional American wrestling, every move tells a story. You build to big moments. You make the audience care about each strike by using them sparingly. Strong style throws that out the window. It's strike after strike after strike until everything blends together. Cornette believes that when you hit too hard too often, you devalue the impact. A big strike should feel special. It should make the crowd gasp. But if you're delivering knockout blows every 30 seconds, nothing feels important anymore. The audience becomes numb to it. They stop reacting because they've seen the same level of intensity for the past 10 minutes straight. The second part of Cornette's Nakamura critique is about WWE's handling of him. When Nakamura came to WWE, he had massive buzz. He was seen as a huge signing from New Japan, but WWE didn't know what to do with him. They watered down his character. They gave him weird storylines. They failed to capitalize on what made him special in Japan. Cornette blames WWE for mismanaging Nakamura's charisma and presentation. Here's a guy who could have been a massive star in America. Instead, he became just another guy on the roster. His matches lost their edge. His character became confusing. The company took someone with genuine mystique and turned him into a joke. This frustrates Cornette because it proves his point about modern wrestling. Companies don't understand how to build stars anymore. They don't know how to protect special qualities. They take someone unique and sand down all the interesting parts until they fit a generic mold. Nakamura could have been special in America. Instead, he became another example of wasted potential. The Nakamura situation also highlights how Japanese and American wrestling philosophies clash. What works in one country doesn't always translate to another. Cornette believes that good wrestling is universal. It's about making people believe and care. But WWE tried to force Nakamura into a style that didn't suit him while also taking away what made him work. The result satisfied no one. 8. Adam Page. Adam Page, who Cornette mockingly calls Hangnail, represents everything wrong with AEW's approach to building champions. Page was positioned as a major star in AEW. He won the World Championship. He was supposed to be a top guy, but Cornette sees him as completely underwhelming. The first problem is that Page doesn't look like a champion. In Cornette's world, champions should be larger than life. They should walk into a room and command respect. They should have physiques that make you believe they could beat anyone. Page looks like a regular guy. He doesn't have the presence. He doesn't have the intimidation factor. He's just some dude in wrestling trunks. But the bigger issue is who helped build Page up, the Elite. Page was closely associated with the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega. He was part of their group. He benefited from their booking power. To Cornette, this makes Page's championship reign illegitimate. He didn't earn it through traditional means. He got it because his friends were in charge. This touches on Cornette's hatred of nepotism in politics and wrestling. He believes championships should go to the best performers who can draw money, not to people who are buddies with the bookers, not to people who are part of the cool kids club. When you give titles based on backstage relationships, you devalue the entire system. Page also represents the modern cosplay champion mentality that Cornette despises. These are wrestlers who dress up like champions and get called champions, but don't actually act like champions. They don't carry themselves with the necessary gravitas. They don't make the title feel important. They just wear the belt and do their regular matches. The nickname Hangnail itself is telling. A hangnail is a minor annoyance. It's not a real problem, just something slightly irritating that you want to get rid of. That's how Cornette sees Page, as a minor talent elevated far beyond his abilities. Someone who wouldn't have gotten anywhere near a world title in a properly run promotion. Cornette also criticizes Page for being coddled by the Elite. Instead of being pushed to improve and develop, Page was protected. He was given easy opponents. He was booked to look good regardless of his actual performance. This kind of treatment creates weak champions who can't handle real pressure or competition. The Page situation exemplifies AEW's broader problems in Cornette's eyes. The company is run by wrestlers who put their friends over regardless of merit. They care more about having fun and booking themselves than building a legitimate wrestling promotion. Page is just one example of this flawed system in action. 7. Brandon Cutler. If you want to understand Cornette's disdain for AEW's lower card, look no further than Brandon Cutler. Cornette calls him Brandon Cutlet, a name that reduces him from a person to a piece of meat. This isn't just an insult. It's a statement about Cutler's value to the wrestling business. Cutler represents amateur hour. He's someone who would have never made it past training in the old territory system. He doesn't have the look. He doesn't have the talent. He doesn't have the charisma. In a properly run promotion, he'd be working local shows and hoping for a tryout. In AEW, he's on national television. Cornette uses Cutler as a symbol of everything wrong with AEW's hiring practices. Instead of recruiting the best athletes and performers, AEW hires friends of the elite. They hire people from the independent scene, regardless of whether they're ready for prime time. The result is a roster full of wrestlers who look like they're playing wrestler rather than being wrestlers. The Cutlet nickname specifically refers to how disposable Cutler is. Ayo, Cutlet is a cheap piece of meat. It's not a premium steak. It's not something special. It's filler. That's exactly how Cornette sees Cutler's role. He's filler on a wrestling card that should feature real stars. Cutler's presence on AEW television actively hurts the product in Cornette's view. When you put someone clearly not ready for that level on screen, you tell the audience this is minor league. You signal that your standards are low. You make people question whether they should take your promotion seriously. This criticism extends beyond Cutler personally to the entire philosophy that allowed him to be hired. AEW operates on an inclusive model where independent wrestlers get chances they wouldn't get elsewhere. Cornette sees this as rewarding mediocrity. In his world, wrestling should be exclusive. Only the best should make it. Everyone else should be told to improve or find another career. The fact that Cutler became a recurring character and even got storyline attention proves Cornette's point about AEW's backwards priorities. Instead of building up legitimate stars, they waste time on wrestlers who will never draw money. They treat everyone as equally valuable when they clearly aren't. 6. Kevin Owens. The Kevin Owens situation is personal for Cornette because they worked together during Owens' developmental years. Back then, Owens was Kevin Steen, and Cornette had major problems with him. Those problems still fuel Cornette's criticism today, even though Owens became a major WWE star. The biggest issue was always Owens' weight and conditioning. Cornette believed that Owens didn't have the physical appearance of a main event wrestler. He was overweight. He didn't look athletic. He didn't present himself as someone who could legitimately beat trained fighters. In Cornette's traditional view, this disqualifies disqualified Owens from top-level success. Cornette pushed Owens hard to improve his conditioning. He told him repeatedly that his weight was holding him back. He argued that if Owens would just get in better shape, he could be a much bigger star. But Owens didn't comply with these demands. He kept working at his own pace and in his own way. This created a fundamental clash over authority and respect. Cornette saw Owens' refusal to change as disrespectful to the business. In the old days, if a veteran or booker told you to lose weight, you lost weight. There was no debate. But Owens represented a new generation that questioned traditional authority. He wanted to succeed on his own terms. The conflict also involved creative disagreements and attitude issues. Cornette felt Owens challenged his booking decisions and authority in ways that were unprofessional. Owens, meanwhile, likely felt Cornette's approach was outdated and limiting. This backstage tension made their working relationship difficult. What really bothers Cornette is that Owens succeeded despite ignoring his advice. Owens became a multi-time world champion in WWE. He main evented major shows. He proved that you could be a top star without fitting Cornette's physical ideal. This success makes Cornette's years of criticism look wrong. Rather than admit he was mistaken, Cornette has doubled down. He still insists that Owens would be even better if he'd listened. He argues that Owens' weight still limits him. He continues pointing out every perceived flaw as proof that his original assessment was correct. It's become a retroactive attempt to protect his own legacy. The Owens story represents a changing wrestling business that left Cornette behind. The old standards about how wrestlers should look no longer apply. Fans care more about talent and character than physique. Owens proved you can succeed without following traditional rules. For Cornette, this is evidence the business has lost its way. 5. Santino Marella. The Santino Marella incident is the most direct example of Cornette's old-school discipline methods destroying his career in the modern era. This wasn't a podcast feud or public criticism. This was a physical confrontation that got Cornette fired from WWE developmental. The incident happened in Ohio Valley Wrestling, where Cornette was head booker. Santino Marella was still Johnny Gio Basco back then, just a developmental trainee. During a segment involving the Boogeyman, Marella allegedly laughed or reacted improperly. This might seem minor, but to Cornette it was a cardinal sin. In professional wrestling, protecting the illusion is everything. When you're backstage or in the middle of a show, you don't break character. You don't laugh at things that are supposed to be serious. You treat the performance as real even when you're off camera. This is how wrestling maintained its mystique for decades. Cornette saw Marella's behavior as a complete violation of these unwritten rules. He believed Marella was disrespecting the business and the Boogeyman's character. In Cornette's mind, this couldn't stand. So he used an old-school method of discipline. He slapped Marella backstage. In the territory days, this kind of physical discipline was common. Veterans would rough up rookies who stepped out of line. It was how the business policed itself and maintained standards. Cornette applied this historical method in a modern corporate environment. The result was immediate disaster. WWE fired Cornette over the incident. The company had zero tolerance for physical violence, even in the name of teaching respect. Marella, the trainee who'd been slapped, was quickly signed to the main roster. Paul Heyman replaced Cornette in developmental. The message was clear. The old ways were dead. This incident taught Cornette that he could no longer enforce the standards he believed in. The corporate wrestling world had different rules. Physical discipline was assault. Traditional methods were illegal. The rookies he wanted to teach now had more power than he did. This fundamental power shift helped push him out of active promotion and into criticism. The bitterness persists because of what happened after. Marella became Santino Marella and had a successful WWE career. He was positioned as a comedy character and got significant television time. Years later, Cornette believes Marella fabricated or exaggerated stories about him, including a claim that Cornette called to gloat about an injury. For Cornette, the Santino situation represents everything wrong with modern wrestling's corporate structure. In trying to maintain professional standards through traditional discipline, he was punished. The person who violated those standards was rewarded with a main roster contract. The system favored unprofessionalism over accountability. 4. Jon Moxley. Jon Moxley, who Cornette calls Plumber Moxley, might be Cornette's most intensely hated active wrestler. The criticism is vicious and personal, going far beyond simple disagreements about wrestling style. Cornette sees Moxley as a complete failure on multiple levels. The first issue is appearance and conditioning. Cornette constantly criticizes how Moxley looks. He doesn't think Moxley maintains the physical conditioning required of a top star. He says Moxley looks sloppy, out of shape, and unprofessional. The Plumber nickname suggests Moxley looks looks like a working-class tradesman rather than an elite athlete. But the appearance criticism is just the surface. The deeper problem is Moxley's in-ring style. Moxley built his post-WWE career on hardcore wrestling. Lots of blood, weapons, and brutal brawling. For Cornette, this is the laziest possible approach to wrestling. It's violence without psychology. It's gore without storytelling. Cornette argues that Moxley uses hardcore elements as a substitute for actual wrestling ability. Instead of building matches through logical sequences and emotional investment, Moxley just bleeds and hits people with objects. There's no craft to it, no skill required, just mindless violence that any untrained person could do. This ties into Cornette's broader hatred of deathmatch wrestling. He sees it as unprofessional and destructive. Wrestlers are shortening their careers and damaging their bodies for meaningless shock value. They're not creating compelling drama or making money long term. They're just engaging in self-destruction that the audience gets bored of quickly. What makes the Moxley situation especially frustrating for Cornette is that Moxley had a better path available. He was Dean Ambrose in WWE. He was in The Shield. He was a main event player in the biggest wrestling company in the world. He could have stayed there and been a traditional star. Instead, Moxley left WWE for AEW and the independent scene. He deliberately chose hardcore wrestling over the mainstream model. He embraced the outlaw mud show style that Cornette despises. This was a conscious decision to downgrade from professional wrestling to amateurish violence. Cornette sees this choice as an indictment of Moxley's character and intelligence. Why would a talented performer with mainstream success choose to become a hardcore wrestler? Why would you voluntarily destroy your body and credibility? To Cornette, it suggests either stupidity or mental problems. The personal attacks on Moxley go beyond professional criticism. Cornette has suggested Moxley needs mental evaluation rather than rehabilitation. He questions Moxley's judgment and decision-making ability. These aren't just critiques of wrestling style, they're attacks on Moxley as a person. Moxley represents everything Cornette hates about modern wrestling in one package. He's someone with legitimate talent who rejected traditional professionalism. He chose violence over psychology. He embraced an unprofessional aesthetic. He succeeded despite violating every rule Cornette holds sacred. His prominence proves the business has lost its way. 3. Kenny Omega. Kenny Omega is interesting because Cornette admits he has talent. Omega is athletic, he has a good look, he can perform impressive moves, but none of that matters because his style embodies everything Cornette thinks is wrong with modern wrestling. Cornette sees Omega as a video game wrestler, someone who treats wrestling like a fighting game instead of a real combat sport. Omega's matches are full of flashy moves and complicated sequences. Everything looks choreographed. Nothing feels like an actual fight between two people who hate each other. The problem with the video game approach is that it destroys believability. When wrestling looks too much like a predetermined performance, it breaks the fundamental illusion. The audience can't suspend their disbelief when they're watching something that's obviously fake. You need at least some pretense of reality to make the drama work. Omega's style prioritizes spectacle over substance. His matches are designed to look cool and generate social media buzz. They're meant to be impressive displays of athleticism, but they don't tell compelling stories. They don't build emotional investment. They're just athletic exhibitions with wrestling moves. This connects to Cornette's broader critique of the elite's influence on modern wrestling. Omega, along with the Young Bucks, popularized a style that values acrobatics over psychology. They proved you could be successful without following traditional wrestling rules. This success has influenced an entire generation of wrestlers who imitate their approach. Cornette believes Omega hurt AEW's credibility by being prominently featured. When your top stars wrestle in a style that looks fake and choreographed, you can't present your promotion as serious competition to WWE. You're essentially admitting you're something different, an alternative product for people who don't care about traditional wrestling. The tragedy, in Cornette's view, is that Omega could have been great if he'd learned proper psychology. He has the physical tools, he has the charisma, but he wasted those gifts on a style designed for YouTube clips rather than long-term storytelling. He chose to be spectacular rather than believable. Omega's success without following traditional rules is deeply threatening to Cornette's worldview. It proves that modern audiences don't necessarily want what Cornette thinks wrestling should be. They're fine with choreographed spectacle. They enjoy the video game style. This makes Cornette's entire career philosophy look outdated. 2. The Young Bucks. Matt and Nick Jackson, known as the Young Bucks, are Cornette's most consistent modern targets. He attacks them relentlessly. Every podcast seems to feature new criticism of their wrestling style. They represent everything wrong with the independent wrestling revolution that led to AEW. The core criticism is that their matches are spot fests. Endless sequences of high-risk moves performed without logic or psychology. They do super kick after super kick after super kick. They hit big moves that don't end the match. They no-sell offense to hit their own moves. The result is matches that look impressive but mean nothing. The super kick party is Cornette's favorite example of everything wrong with the Bucks. The super kick used to be a devastating finishing move. Shawn Michaels would hit one super kick and the match was over. The Young Bucks hit dozens of super kicks in a single match and nobody even stays down. They've completely destroyed the move's credibility. This devaluation extends to everything in their matches. Big moves that should end a contest become transition spots. Near falls that should create drama happen so often they become meaningless. The audience becomes numb to everything because nothing is protected or special. It's spectacle without impact. Cornette also criticizes the Bucks for never evolving. They've been wrestling the same style for over a decade. Despite getting older, gaining weight, and suffering injuries, they haven't adapted. They still try to do the same high-flying moves they did in their 20s. The result is slower, sloppier versions of their old matches. The nickname Spot Monkey refers to wrestlers who just do moves without telling stories. They're like monkeys performing tricks, impressive but meaningless. The Bucks pioneered this approach in modern wrestling. They proved you could build a career on athletic moves alone without traditional psychology. What really bothers Cornette is that the Bucks succeeded despite violating every rule he holds sacred. They became millionaires. They helped start AEW. They're executive vice presidents of a major wrestling company. They did all this by doing the exact opposite of what Cornette says wrestlers should do. The Young Bucks' success disproves Cornette's fundamental beliefs about wrestling. He always said you needed to protect your moves, you needed to sell, you needed to build matches with proper psychology. The Bucks ignored all of that and succeeded anyway. This makes Cornette's decades of teaching look wrong, but there's another layer to Cornette's hatred. The Bucks are influencing the next generation. Young wrestlers watch them and imitate their style. Instead of learning traditional fundamentals, new performers are copying the Spotfest approach. This creates a cycle where bad habits get passed down and amplified. Cornette calls this clowns influencing clowns. The Bucks learned from a generation that already deviated from proper wrestling. Now they're teaching an even worse version to people who never learned traditional basics. Each generation gets further from what wrestling should be. The Bucks are the prime example of this degradation. The Bucks also represent the triumph of the independent wrestling model over the traditional territory system. They built their careers outside the mainstream system. They didn't pay dues in developmental territories. They didn't work their way up through established companies. They created their own path and it worked. This success challenges everything Cornette built his career on. The old system required apprenticeship and respect for traditions. You learned from veterans. You worked for years before getting opportunities. The Bucks bypassed all of that. They proved you could succeed through social media buzz and independent bookings alone. 1. Vince Russo. Vince Russo isn't just someone Cornette dislikes. He's Cornette's arch nemesis. The hatred between them is deep, personal, and ideological. This isn't about wrestling style or backstage incidents. This is about the fundamental destruction of professional wrestling as Cornette understands it. The feud centers on completely opposite philosophies about what wrestling should be. Cornette believes wrestling must look like a real athletic contest. It needs long-term storytelling. It requires protecting the illusion of legitimacy. Every decision should serve the goal of making people believe in the product. Russo's approach, which he called Crash TV, was the exact opposite. Wrestling was just a television show. The goal was getting ratings through shock value. Long-term storytelling didn't matter if people weren't watching tonight. The whole thing was fake anyway, so why pretend otherwise? This clash played out in real time in WWF and WCW. Cornette tried to maintain traditional standards. Russo pushed for constant swerves, celebrity involvement, and storylines that exposed the business. Every creative meeting became a war between these worldviews. Eventually, Russo won and Cornette was marginalized. Cornette believes Russo personally destroyed his career multiple times. He says Russo fucked him over and ran him out of promotions. This wasn't just professional disagreement, it was active sabotage. Russo saw Cornette as a threat to his authority and systematically undermined him. The specific examples of Russo's booking philosophy enrage Cornette to this day. The most infamous is David Arquette winning the WCW championship. This was a publicity stunt designed to get mainstream media attention. It worked for that purpose, but it completely destroyed the credibility of the title. In traditional wrestling, the World Championship represents the best wrestler in the company. It has history and prestige. Fans care about who holds it because it means something. When you give it to an actor as a joke, you're telling everyone the title is meaningless. You're sacrificing long-term credibility for a short-term publicity spike. Even worse was Russo booking himself to win the WCW championship. This wasn't even a publicity stunt. It was pure ego. A non-wrestler booker with no athletic credibility made himself champion. There was no business reason for it, no financial upside, just Russo putting himself over because he could. Cornette sees this self-aggrandizement as the ultimate betrayal of wrestling principles. Bookers are supposed to be invisible. Their job is making stars and drawing money. They're not supposed to put themselves on screen, let alone make themselves champion. Russo doing this proved he cared more about his ego than the business. The damage from Russo's era still affects wrestling today. He normalized the idea that championships don't matter. He made swerves and shock value the default approach. He taught a generation of wrestlers and bookers that long-term storytelling was old-fashioned. The outlaw mud show culture Cornette hates traces directly back to Russo's influence. Russo even failed repeatedly after the initial Attitude Era success. He got a job in TNA and was so toxic they couldn't publicly acknowledge his employment. The network had problems with him. He got fired again. He proved that his approach didn't work long-term, yet his influence persists. The personal hatred between Cornette and Russo has become its own form of entertainment. They've feuded publicly for decades. Cornette has made alleged threats. They've attacked each other in shoots and interviews. This real-life conflict has become more compelling than many wrestling storylines. The irony is that Cornette, who champions kayfabe and maintaining the illusion, has built much of his modern career on a completely real, non-kayfabe feud. His hatred of Russo is genuine. It's not worked for an angle. It's authentic personal animosity that happens to be entertaining to wrestling fans. This authenticity makes the Russo feud Cornette's most successful piece of content. People tune in to hear him rant about Russo. They want to see the anger. They enjoy the real emotion. In trying to defend traditional wrestling, Cornette accidentally discovered that real hatred draws better than fake storylines. Russo represents the moment wrestling changed forever. Before him, there were standards and traditions. After him, anything went if it got attention. Cornette sees himself as the last defender of the old ways. Russo was the revolutionary who destroyed what Cornette was trying to protect. The fundamental question their feud raises is whether wrestling needs to maintain its illusion to be successful. Russo proved you could make money by admitting it's fake and prioritizing entertainment over believability. Cornette insists this approach is short-sighted and destructive. 25 years later, they're still arguing about who was right. Every other person on this list connects back to Russo in some way. The Young Bucks' Spot Fest style, that's the logical evolution of prioritizing moments over storytelling. Moxley's hardcore approach, that's the descendant of Russo's shock value philosophy. AEW's approach to championships, it traces back to Russo teaching people titles don't matter. Cornette blames Russo for creating the culture that allowed all his other targets to exist. If wrestling had maintained its traditional standards, none of these other problems would have emerged. The Young Bucks would have been told to slow down and sell. Moxley would have been taught proper psychology. AEW would have been built on legitimate competition. But Russo broke the system that enforced those standards. He proved you didn't need them to succeed. He showed that wrestling could be something different, more openly fake, more focused on shock value, more interested in television ratings than athletic credibility. That opened the door for everything Cornette hates about modern wrestling. The Russo feud is ultimately about nostalgia versus evolution. Cornette wants wrestling to return to what it was during his peak years. Russo pushed it to evolve into something new. The modern wrestling landscape suggests Russo won this war. Wrestling today looks nothing like the territorial era Cornette championed. That's why the hatred remains so intense. Cornette isn't just mad at Russo personally, he's mad that Russo's vision of wrestling defeated his own. He's mad that the business he loves was transformed into something he doesn't recognize. He's mad that he spent his career building something that was torn down by a television writer who didn't respect traditional rules. Vince Russo will forever be Jim Cornette's #1 target, not because of any single incident, but because he represents the death of traditional professional wrestling and the birth of everything Cornette can't stand about the modern business. Claude is AI and can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.